It is now my great privilege to invite Dr. Jonathan Karl to address the graduates.
Hey, that's pretty cool. Thank you. Thank you. Amazing. Good morning, President Siliski, Board Chair Rick Wheeler, graduates, friends, family, Washington College faculty and staff. And to the class of 2025, congratulations, you've pulled it off. So it's been said that a speaker at commencement is a little bit like the body at one of those old-fashioned Irish wakes. You need one to have the party, but nobody expects you to say very much. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep this short because you're going to forget this speech, but you are never going to forget this day, and it is a high honor to share it with you. This actually is not my first Washington College commencement address. Well, it's the first I've given, but I was here when I was just 10 years old, sitting out there in the back somewhere, because my brother was graduating. And the speaker that day was a guy named James Michener. At the time, he was one of maybe America's most popular writers. He lived not far from here, and he had a new novel coming out called Chesapeake that was eagerly awaited all around the country. And truthfully, I don't remember anything he said, except for one thing. It was a piece of advice that he gave the graduates. He told them not to buy his book when it came out. He said, wait for the paperback because it will be cheaper. So look, I can't promise any advice quite as practical as that, but hopefully I will leave you with a little something to remember. When I came here to Chestertown as a 10-year-old to sit out there with the families at graduation, I was living in the Black Hills of South Dakota in a small motel room on the outskirts of a town with about 350 people. I had moved out there with my mom and my stepfather because they had this crazy idea to write a history of Mount Rushmore, that massive mountain carving of Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. I spent a lot of time under those granite heads as a kid, hearing the stories of what they represented. And I would actually imagine the questions I would ask if I had a chance to actually ask any of them any questions. So I would look up at George Washington. How did you not give up when the British drove your army out of New York? Why did you voluntarily step down as president? And did you really cut down a cherry tree? Thomas Jefferson. How could you write all men are created equal and own slaves? Teddy Roosevelt. Why are you up there on that mountain between Lincoln and Jefferson for all of eternity? As my parents, who had never gone to college, set out to find and interview the people that worked on Mount Rushmore, I started to think about becoming a journalist. That someday I would have the chance to actually ask questions of a real living president. Like all of you, I ended up at a small liberal arts college. I was a year away from graduating when I watched something unfolding a world away that changed me forever. I sat glued to the television as students, kids my age, kids your age now, started marching, protesting in the middle of China's capital, in a place called Tiananmen Square. I thought they seemed to me like my friends. They were having fun, but they were also taking a stand for their freedom. They were protesting joyfully and peacefully and with purpose. Some of the Chinese students had created a large plaster statue of a woman carrying a torch, the goddess of liberty, they called it. Like our Statue of Liberty, but with Chinese characteristics. I was inspired. China was not a free country. It was a place where you could go to jail for criticizing the government. But people just like me and my friends and like you were trying to change that. The protest went on for 3 weeks, growing larger and more hopeful each day. And then the Chinese Communist government decided it was time to end. When the students refused to leave, they sent in the army. Peace and freedom-loving students were no match for the heavily armed soldiers and imposing tanks rolling across Tiananmen Square. The kids were beaten. Many were shot. It was a massacre. And the only reason that I knew what was happening as I sat in my dorm room in Poughkeepsie, New York, was that because American journalists were there to bear witness. And in my office today, I have a large framed photograph of an unknown man, unarmed, carrying only a small bag, standing in front of a row of 4 Chinese tanks. The photo was taken on June 5th, 1989, as the Chinese army rounded up the last remaining student protesters. To me, it is the most inspiring and terrifying photo that was taken in my lifetime. Inspiring because it showed the peaceful defiance of one brave soul, silently, firmly, courageous. Tragic because minutes later, the man in front of the tank was grabbed by soldiers and he was never seen again. My large copy of that photo is signed by the journalist who took it, James Widener of the Associated Press. He captured the moment for all time. I look at that photo on my wall every day that I am in my office. It reminds me of the unnamed man's courage and the journalist who took the picture. We don't know what happened to Tank Man, as he became to be known, but we saw what he did thanks to an Associated Press photographer, and also to videographers for ABC News, NBC News, and CNN, who captured video of the scene. The Chinese government then pulled the plug on the ABC cameras and the NBC cameras and the CNN cameras. And then they threw the Associated Press and all the other American journalists out of the country. If you were graduating from college today in Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou, you likely wouldn't know a damn thing about Tank Man. The government has erased the memory, or tried to erase the memory, of what he did, of what those students were protesting, and of the massacre. I set out to be a journalist because I wanted to watch history unfolding. I wanted to be a truth teller, the good, the inspiring, and the tragic. The kid looking up at Mount Rushmore probably would be shocked to hear that he went on to ask questions of 7 different US presidents and counting. But he would have known that he lived in a country where it is possible to ask tough questions of the most powerful people in our government without fear of retribution. A country that has freedom that Tank Man's country didn't have. A country where the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press. A country where a president can't, or at least shouldn't be able to, banish a reporter or a news organization because he doesn't like a question, a news report, or an editorial policy. I've witnessed some monumental history along the way. I was at the Capitol building when it was evacuated on September 11th, 2001. Capitol police officers ordered me away from the building. I insisted I wanted to stay. I had no way of knowing, but as I was arguing with a Capitol Hill police officer, the heroes of United Flight 93 had broken into the cockpit and brought down a plane that was likely headed to right where I was, right to the Capitol Dome, saving countless lives as they ended their own in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. One of those passengers was a 32-year-old software salesman named Todd Beamer, who we was heard saying, "Let's roll," as he helped lead the charge on the cockpit to take on the hijackers. I was there on Capitol Hill late that night when members of Congress from both parties briefly returned and assembled to the steps outside the building. After a few short speeches and a moment of silence, the congressional leaders started to walk away. The building was still closed, but their moment of defiance wasn't over. A few members near the rear of the assembled group of about 200 members of Congress started singing "God Bless America." Soon they were all singing. Look, reporters are trained to be skeptical. As an old Chicago Tribune editor once put it, "Chum, if your mother says she loves you, check on it." But I had to hold back tears as I watched those politicians sing that song. I had never felt more proud of my country or more privileged to be on the grounds of the United States Capitol. In the darkness that night, the Capitol felt to me like sacred ground. On September 12th, Congress did in fact reconvene and I was back at work. This is what I wrote in my journal that day. The enormity of what has happened is just now sinking in. I'm haunted by the images of those planes crashing into the Twin Towers, haunted by the images of those so desperate they jumped from 100 stories just minutes before those mighty symbols crashed to earth. I look at the Capitol Dome, the single most powerful symbol of American democracy, and I wonder, what if? What if that plane had crashed in Pennsylvania, instead crashed squarely into the Capitol Dome? Not long after September 11th, I met Todd Beamer's widow, Lisa, inside the Capitol building, and I sat with her in the visitors gallery of a mostly empty House chamber. For what seemed like several minutes, neither of us said anything as we looked at the House floor, a place that would have likely been reduced to rubble if it weren't for those brave passengers and the sacrifice they made on Flight 93. Your husband saved this place, and he probably saved my life too. It was hard to contemplate her pain and sacrifice. She was the mother of 2 young boys and was 5 months pregnant with a baby girl when her husband died in the wreckage on a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I was at the Capitol when the same Capitol building, I was at the White House when the same Capitol building came under attack on January 6th. Police officers were beaten, windows smashed, people called for the hanging of the vice president. I was horrified by what I was seeing. The Capitol still felt like sacred ground to me. So I worked hard to document what happened on that day. I wrote a book about it. I wanted the world to know and history to know the truth that we had witnessed. There are people in positions of power and authority who pretend that January 6th was peaceful, that we didn't witness a violent attempt to overturn a presidential election for the first time since George Washington took his first oath of office in New York. There are people who would like to cover up that truth, just like the Chinese covered up the truth of Tiananmen Square. It's been said that history is written by the winners. I think that's bunk. History is written by storytellers. Brutus and his fellow conspirators killed Caesar, but it is Caesar's story that we know. It doesn't hurt when William Shakespeare is one of those telling your story. We are blessed when the good storytellers are also the truth tellers. What I don't like about that phrase, history is written by the winners, is that it implies that there is no real truth, that history is just what the so-called winners say it is. Don't believe that. It's true that the students in Tiananmen Square tried to stand up for their own freedom and their country's too, and that they were brutally brought down. It's true that terrorists attacked this country on September 11th, and that a brave group of strangers on Flight 93 sacrificed their lives to save the U.S. Capitol. It's true that the Capitol came under attack once again on January 6th. I could talk longer, but I don't want to break my promise. So I'm going to close with a couple of very quick pieces of advice. Don't believe those who tell you there is no real truth. That's a lie. Stand firmly for your principles and don't be afraid to change them. Be strong in standing up for what is right, but be open to the possibility that you are wrong. Expose yourself to people who you disagree with. Listen to them. Hear them out. Understand where they are coming from. And along those lines, read and watch things that challenge your beliefs. Don't be deterred or discouraged by those who criticize you. Learn from what they say. Live in the moment, but plan for the future, and most importantly, learn from the past. Be kind and compassionate, not just to your family and friends, that's easy, but to strangers, and especially to your enemies. But hopefully you don't have any of those. Do good things, but not just when people are watching, but also when there is nobody around to give you credit. That's the test of true character. And finally, everything in moderation, including moderation. Think of that tonight. Thank you, class of 2025, for letting me share this moment with you. Congratulations.